Hello, this test call from VC team, test call for recording, Washington DC. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, hi. I can hear you well. You can
Hey,
see and hear the room?
yeah, all is good.
Okay, great. Are you sharing content?
No, I'm not sharing
All
it.
right, hold on. One
It's here
sec.
now. It's here. I can see it
You can
now.
see it?
Yes,
Okay.
we can.
Can you see our presentation now?
Yeah, I see it.
All right, excellent, excellent. Thank you. All right, everything looks good here. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye.
Oh, hey, Tamil, are you still there?
Yes, Brendan.
Hey, will the client be able to share the recording with external people?
Oh, one sec. Sure, I will update it for the external hosting.
Yes, please, please. Because she'd like to share the recording with people outside of the bank.
Sure.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Brendan, one more thing, but I
Yeah.
see the videos not on the full screen. There is a black at the corners, two corners. So is it how it looks?
For the camera or the presentation?
Both, both.
Oh, both. Yeah, yes. The cameras in here are 4x3,
Okay,
and so is the presentation. That's just how
okay,
it's set
okay.
up.
Okay,
Yeah.
just wanted to confirm.
All right. Thanks for
Thank you.
checking, though.
Mhm.
Yeah, good. Okay, super. Good. So, เป็นอันฟัง So, Hörner. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great.
So the slide there 4x3, they will look like this.
Yeah, if we can just go back to, duplicate. Perfect. Oh, so that one's fine. That one's messed up. That one's great.
It's the adapter. Yeah, so it's. I'm just gonna take. Yeah, let me see. This is a loose. Okay, adapter. The adapter is a bad adapter.
But then add more technical. I think we have it by email. So we don't have like every day, but we definitely wrote, like each part and each other part and those. Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. Today is the one. Yeah, I think we can add this. Thank you.
Is there anything else I can help?
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, it's showing the desktop, so let's go ahead and take it to.
Got it. Oh, sure. Yeah.
We're bringing the mic right now. Sorry, I requested it since last. Yes.
Hi, Paul. I'm Omar. Nice to meet you. Well, thank you very much for coming and taking the time to talk to us.
This is my colleague Sam.
Hi, how are you? I'm
Sam, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So Paul just got back from the DR yesterday.
Oh, my country.
86 degrees. I never saw the beach. No,
Oh, that's sad. I was there actually a week ago for fun. My sister actually got married there. We were celebrating also my parents' 50th anniversary. I'll let you. Are you settled?
I think we're settled.
You're waiting for, what was it again? A mic? Okay.
Check 1 2.
Okay. I mean, we can
Check 1 2.
wait a couple
For
minutes
this
to get
room
people.
or for the people
Is it okay?
to be heard in this room or to be heard by?
to
Okay, got it. Thank you. I was about to say, I think I can project for this room's sake. Got it. Yeah, sure.
But I
Okay.
mean, also, there's still people outside
Great.
trying to get food, so we can wait a couple. Maybe you can grab a bite.
Thank you. Thank you.
Check 1 2 3. Check 1 2 3.
Better to be able to take time. There's actually
Great. Is this just permanently on, so I don't have to worry? I just
no,
speak.
actually, let me try this. Sorry, I think it's. Oh, no, this one is different. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Well, I guess it is on always.
There we go.
Okay. So, was it your first time there?
Second time I was there in November, so
Okay. Well, again, next time there's options. So I have to advise you.
thank you very much.
You don't have to do the, all-inclusive results if that's not your piece of cake. There's a bunch of Airbnbs and a bunch of options for more kind of customized tourism, including, by the way, ecotourism. It's booming a lot, but people know the country more for the beaches, so they go to Punta Cana. But in the middle, north. I don't know what's going on. So you're working. So this is the program we have supporting the ministry, right there.
Yeah.
Training principles.
Yeah. We launched it yesterday. That's why I was there.
So did you meet? Yes.
I've met the whole team at this point.
The vice minister, I think, in charge.
Well, there's Juan Javier Jimenez, there's Frank Cáceres, there's Victor Sánchez, Julio Sánchez, el director de Sudoso, y Mica Dora es también de Sudoso, y
Pero hay un undersecretary, un viceministro, que es el tío de mi ex. Debería acordarme de su nombre, pero Dios mío, qué pena. Martín.
Alberto.
Martínez, ay Dios mío. Qué embarrassing. Estoy viendo su cara ahora. Él creo que tenía a cargo el tema de principals.
¿Es Víctor Martínez? No.
Víctor. Bueno, ya me voy a acordar. Pero no sé, a lo mejor lo cambiaron, como cambian tanto la política. Cuando eres viceministro, hay mucho turnover.
One per page, okay, thank you.
Bueno, ya me acordé.
No te va a hacer. Sí, perfecto.
Start.
Okay.
You're doing. Start. Break, ¿verdad? Break.
Santoyo.
¿Tu Santoyo es de México?
My wife and I shared our last names.
Oh.
Yeah, my wife is from Mexico.
I see. Will you speak Spanish? Okay.
I lived 6 years in Mexico City.
I see. Okay. Because I saw in your bio that you had training there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we got married and lived there for 6 years while my wife was in medical school.
Oh, I see. Very good. Shall we start? Working? Yeah. Hello. Welcome, everybody. I think we can get started. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the manager for the Global Knowledge and Innovation team in the Education Global Practice at the bank, Omar Arias. And today we were privileged, I would say, to have a guest speaker to talk to us about a crucial issue for our work. How do we leverage leadership in schools? We all realize that providing education services is a very complex endeavor. I think in any country, most likely the Ministry of Education is, if not the largest, one of the largest providers of services on a day-to-day basis. I mean, you can compare it with McDonald's, except that the service being provided is way more complex. Yet, the attention that I think we have paid to the issue of management and leadership really pairs in comparison to its importance. Now, that has been changing. There's now more work, and usually as it happens, once we start measuring, what gets measured gets the attention. Some of you may be familiar with the work trying to measure management practices in schools, building on the work that has been done to measure the quality of management in firms across country. And some of that work, actually, the results from that work has been featured in the World Development Report of 2008, where the report has argued, look, this is a crucial driver of learning. For various reasons, I won't get into it because otherwise, I'm sure Paul will have at least one slide on that. Now, I think so Paul brings a unique perspective on this. I mean, not just sort of the kind of technical academic, but I would say more than anything, the practical experience of having worked with thousands of principals on training, building leadership, in particularly in really interesting settings. I was taking a look at the network of Uncommon Schools. I had heard of it, but I had not really looked into it. I think it sounds like it is a really fantastic initiative. And for those of you who haven't really looked, I encourage you to do that. This seminar is being sponsored by our two thematic groups on management and implementation capacity. We have one of our leads here, Melissa. Juan, I don't know if he's still awake. Probably he's connected. And our thematic group on teachers, and we have Tara sitting here. So without further ado, again, Paul, I mean, I could read his bio, but you have it in front of you. He brings, again, not just the kind of technical and expertise background, but I think the wisdom, I'm sure, from having to sit and stand in front of principals and try to instill behavioral change. And, the issue of leadership is usually one of those issues where everybody agrees, well, yeah, it's important, but can we actually do anything about it? I mean, some people may think, oh, you're born a leader, you cannot be made a leader. I would imagine you would disagree with that. And so I'm really eager to hear the talk, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Paul, thank you very much, and welcome to the bank.
Good afternoon. It is really a privilege to be here, and I'm going to try to interact with you as much as possible, not just talk. And so just a couple of quick norms. I'm going to use every minute you give me, every additional minute you give me, I will use, and I will honor ending when I have to end. And I'm going to ask you to participate with me. I'm going to ask you to turn and talk multiple times and talk about what you're learning. And whenever we want to come back together, I'll just raise my hand. If you can raise your hand as well, and then if we all stop talking and raise our hand, we'll get back and forth between small group work and large group work. And then we can just keep our technology on task for the sake of everybody in the room. Can we commit to these norms? Great. So I'd like to dive in before I talk anything about my own story by thinking about reimagining leadership from another field. The person in this picture that you see is Simon Rattle. He is a highly accomplished orchestra conductor who's worked in many places, most recently as the head of the Birmingham Orchestra, Symphony Orchestra, and they have captured multiple videos of him teaching. In this particular video clip, we watch him working with a group of students. He's speaking in German, but we have it subtitled. For those of you who don't know German, I think it's German, but I read the subtitles. What I'd like you to do is to watch this clip. I'd like to think about what actions does Simon Rattle take to lead the orchestra, and how do these actions relate to school leadership? Let's take a look.
Ja, gut, okay, super, gut. So, den Anfang. So, Hörner. Wow, okay. Ja, super. Gut, so, doch, super. In Fagott, ist es möglich, Pianissimo zu spielen? Es ist ein bisschen... Können wir nur Fagott spielen? gut, das ist super. Und so mit Melodie mehr. Ja, okay. Ja, gut. Ein letzter Akkord, ganzer Bogen. Wow. So, letzten 3. Letzten 3 und 1. Ja, so können wir. Ja, so, Streicher spielen für mich, ja? Ganzer Bogen. Und, ja, mit mir einmal. Und, ja, ganzer Bogen ist nicht. Risiko. Und, ja, besser, ich kann fast etwas hören. Okay, nochmal. Ja, okay. Hässlich, aber perfekt. Okay, so, ja, so, letzten 3, Tutti, letzten 3. So, und 1. Oh ja, so, ja, nochmal. Und, go. Und 1. Ja, okay, gut.
Just take a moment and turn and talk to the person sitting next to you. What actions do you see him take to lead the orchestra, and how would you apply these actions to school leadership? Turn to your partner and share out.
I wouldn't say likable, right? But it's setting the bar. Well, I wanted to make good for audience. You should relate to
We'll learn quickly this norm of raising the hand. Take a little time. We'll learn it. I'd love to hear you share out. What did you talk about with your partner? What are some of the actions you saw Simon Rattle take to conduct the orchestra, and how do you relate this to school leadership? And if you could share out, if you could share your name for me. Start right here. Yes, please.
Yeah, please, for the...
I'm Cynthia Hobbs from the IDB, formerly from the World Bank. One of the first things we noticed was that he gave very precise instructions, so everyone understood exactly what was expected. And he also led by example, so he showed what he wanted as well as telling what he wanted.
Beautiful. What else? What else did you see? We'll come right here. And your name? Maria.
So I think he also pushed them, to perform better. So, he was encouraging them and, telling them what exactly is missing. And then this was done through constructive feedback. So that was one element that was very clear in the...
Fantastic. And we had one person in the back here. Yeah.
He provides feedback, and where the feedback is a little bit tough, he makes it funny, which I found very nice.
So he listens. Personally, I find extraordinary that you can listen to 300 instruments and figure out exactly where the mistake is. But it is a gift of a leader, is in all of the noise, I can figure out what is dissonant, target it, and then teach. How do you relate all of this to school leadership? How do you think these actions relate to school leadership? Yes.
I'm Naoko from Global Partnership for Education. So we thought actually all the techniques actually can apply to the school leadership, as we thought the school leader needs to guide each teachers depending on their needs. So really the leader needs to be watching, observing each teachers and identify the needs and give precise feedback and guidance so the teacher can grow. And also school as like a whole team, the humorous part can probably put all the teachers together to build the team.
Yeah, think about that connection for a moment. The conductor does not play a single instrument. It's not creating any of the sound, but there is no orchestra without him. And when we think about school leaders, they are not the teacher of the students in some cases. In some cases, they are both the school leader and the teacher, but in many cases, they're only working with the teachers. They don't directly teach the student. And yet, the most effective learning happens when they are doing the right work. The connection I would make to this is what we see when we watch Simon Rattle is he does not do what a typical school administrator would do. He doesn't feel his job is to sit back and to evaluate his orchestra or to administrate his orchestra. The real purpose of school leadership is not to administer or to evaluate teachers, but it is to develop them. The real purpose of school leadership is not to evaluate or to administer, but it is to develop teachers. Because great schools don't just find great teachers, they create them. We will never have enough great schools and the great teachers in the world to say, we just got to find them and that'll be enough to create excellent learning. We can create great teachers. How? By the quality of the leader. So I'd like to dive into this idea and say, well, what does that look like? I'd like to start by telling a personal story. I grew up right outside of Chicago. And when I was a young boy, I was a sports fanatic. Well, I guess you could say I still am a sports fanatic. And I was obsessed with imitating my heroes. So growing up, when I grew up, one of my biggest heroes was Michael Jordan. And I loved basketball. And I remember going out and after watching him play, I would try to dribble like him and pass like him and shoot like him. Given my size and skill level, I never was that good, not even close. But I got better. And that carried over to my first year of teaching. I began teaching in Mexico City. I was a terrible teacher. I remember my students being bored, not really getting it, not understanding. One of my students saying, I just don't know what I'm learning today. And going home and go, oh. But I knew who the best teacher in the school was. Her name was Roxana Aparicio. She taught middle school math. And every moment I had, I'd go sit in the back of her classroom and watch. And at first it was magical. It felt like something I couldn't understand. But little by little, I learned a technique that she was using and brought it to my own classroom. And I got better. And that carried over to my first year as a school principal when I arrived to the city of Newark, which is the first place I was a principal. And for those of you who do not know much about Newark, New Jersey, just to share with you a little bit of the context, there's an annual survey in New Jersey that asks students what they plan to do when they graduate from college. Well, here's the stats of the city of Newark and our traditional public schools in Newark. Of 100 students who start high school, this is the percentage who make it to their senior year. I didn't say graduate, I just said make it. And then in that survey, they asked what they want to do. And this is the number of them who say they plan on attending a four-year college. There's a big difference between plan and enroll. And we don't have good data tracking how many actually enroll, but when we just look at the national statistics, our best estimate is that this is the number out of every 100 who actually enroll in a four-year college. And if you've looked at students of color and low-income students' graduation rates from college in the United States, only 39% are graduating from four-year colleges of those who start. That means our best prediction is 2 out of every 100 students who start in our traditional public high schools in Newark graduate. So this was the context I faced when I first became a school leader, which will resonate with some of the challenges we face all across the world in the field of education. And I arrived and didn't know what to do. The same thing as a first-year teacher. And that led me to say, where can I go for help? Well, despite those challenges, at the core of this, I realized it doesn't matter how we teach if students haven't learned. And I want to start from that premise, because when I talk about building excellent schools, for me, there's no vision of an excellent schools that is met if this doesn't happen. It doesn't matter how we teach if students haven't learned. So I want to talk a little bit about that being the premise by which we define changing outcomes in education. And in that premise, my colleague Doug Lamav, who wrote the book Teach Like a Champion, did a study of the results in the state of New York. And he created this scatter plot, which is quite fascinating. It's the performance a few years ago on the 4th grade English language arts exam in New York State. And every dot on this graph represents a school. And on the y-axis, you have the percentage of students who are proficient on the assessment. And the x-axis, the percentage of students in that school who qualified for a free or reduced lunch. So this dot right here means it had 70% free reduced lunch and 47% proficient. Turn and talk. What do you see? Turn to your neighbor and talk. Turn and talk. Let's share out. Someone share with us, what do you see? I know you can analyze data, so what do you see? Yes, and your name?
Yeah, what we saw,
your name is?
Sorry, my name is Veronica from
Veronica.
the IDB.
Yeah.
What we saw is that for schools that are richer, that is for those that have like lower percentage of free reduced lunch, maybe lower than 30%, that like most of them do very like well, but when you go to the poorer schools, it's almost random. It seems like some of them do very well, as good as the rich schools, but some of them do really, really bad.
So the line of best fit is not very helpful for the right-hand side of this data. What else do you see? Yes, right here.
Harriet Nanyonjo from the Education Global Practice. The majority of the students actually, they depend on free lunch, but most of them are poor performers at the same time. That's why you see that concentration in the lower left.
Right. So you can say there still is a line, there still is a predictive nature of the results. Absolutely. What else do you see? Yes, right here.
Thank you. That there are a number of exceptions where that isn't the case, which is really quite interesting to know what's going on in those schools.
Yeah, we could call those the upper right-hand corner, the outliers, the places that have students that you would not predict they would perform the way they did, and yet they're performing at the levels of the highest income students in their state. The research often calls these 90-90-90 schools, schools that have 90% of their students qualify for a free reduced lunch. Often they're 90% students of color, and yet 90% proficient on state or national assessments. When I saw this data, two questions came to my mind. The first was exactly what you just shared. What are they doing that is separating them from all of the rest? Remember, this is fourth grade ELA results. These are non-selective elementary schools. This isn't that they picked a certain student. But the second question I wanted to ask is not what are they doing now? What did they do to get there? How did they change outcomes for what should have been here by a prediction? And the final question I was asking myself as a new leader is, well, if they can do it, why can't I? If they can do it, why can't I? You can rearrange these data plots and pick whatever you think is the biggest challenge in education. You could change it to single-family homes or a certain ethnic group or special education or ELL. The dots rearrange themselves, but you will find in most of our states there are always a few schools in the upper right-hand corner showing us the way. And what's striking is we did the same analysis in Chile and found a very similar story. While there is a predictive nature on the CIMSE exam in fourth grade language in Chile, we still have some schools in the upper right-hand corner that are bucking the odds of what happens. And this is what has led to my sort of life's work, which is to study how can we do things differently, like what's happening in that upper right-hand corner. So I started as a principal of one school, and currently I am the chief schools officer for 53 schools, along with my colleague, Julie Jackson, that we manage in 6 cities on the East Coast, Newark, Camden, Rochester, Boston, Troy, and Brooklyn, New York. But in the process of the work we've done with these 53 schools, I've also had a chance to work with the Relay Graduate School of Education to start a Principals Academy and a Principal Supervisors Academy, as we realized there's nobody training principal supervisors around instructional leadership. And so that we started training 600 people annually across the country. And then we've launched a Leverage Leadership Institute to select 25 fellows every year from originally in the United States and now from across the globe who have already produced a school in the upper right-hand corner, already have some of the highest achievement or highest gains in their cities, states, or countries, and wanted to learn how to replicate that for others. And the fruit of that work is we've trained 25 global fellows each year and have trained about 20,000 leaders across the globe in these same practices. And we've also tried to put it into paper and have a series of about 8 books that have been published that have sold about 2 million copies, translated to 3 languages. All of this has been about what is in that upper right-hand corner that makes the difference. And when we've done this, it's spread out off of various parts of the country and across the globe. These are different countries and states and where leaders are implementing these strategies and impacting the results in at least one school in these various places. And what have we learned? That exceptional school leaders succeed because of how they use their time. Exceptional school leaders succeed because of how they use their time. They take the highest leverage actions more frequently and more effectively. The great schools were not defined by having a higher percentage of great teachers, at least when they started. Their teachers became good because of the quality of their leader. It wasn't the nature of the student they had. It wasn't the nature of their resources or the amount of money they had. It was how a leader spent their time was the biggest driver of creating the success in the schools. And this is what led us to all of the publications, particularly Leverage Leadership 2.0, as we studied these highest effective leaders on the ground, right next to them, filmed them, walked around with them, and said, what are you doing with your time that's making the difference? And we discovered there were 7 levers of leadership that they were doing that separated their work from everybody else. And you have an email with the set of slides, so if you don't get all this down, don't worry, you've got it for you afterwards. Data-driven instruction, which basically the simplest way to describe that is, how do I know if my students are learning? And if they're not, what do I do about it? It sounds simple, but not a lot of schools ask those 2 questions. Observation and feedback. Do I know how to coach teachers to improve the learning? Planning. Can I plan the curriculum and daily lesson plans? And professional development. Can I strengthen culture and instruction with PD that sticks? These are the 4 levers of instruction. And they were accompanied by 3 levers of culture. Driving a strong student culture to make sure kids are coming to school, coming to class, and are engaged in class to learn. And then a strong adult culture and developing secondary leaders. How do you manage other leaders in the building? This is more for larger schools than smaller schools. But of all of those 7, we discovered that there were 3 super levers that schools used when they were moving from mediocre to good or from good to great. That if they could only do so much, they focused on data-driven instruction, student culture, and observation and feedback. With those actions, the leaders who spent more of their time in these levers than others were the ones who had schools with greater results. What did that impact look like? When I started at the school where I took over for principal, the school was at that time just slightly above the district average, but not much better. And then over time, as we implemented these levers, the results changed. So started on a personal journey. When we look at the first school I had a chance to lead, North Star Academy Middle School in Newark, New Jersey, you see in 2003 what our results were in math and in literacy. The red line is the district average, and the yellow line is the state average. And what happened over a 5-year span in performance. But that was one school that slowly but surely changed learning results. Then we replicated the same thing at the elementary school level, where the elementary school students from Newark, 90% free reduced lunch, were the highest achieving students in the state of New Jersey, regardless of income level. If you know New Jersey, you know there's a lot of incredibly high income parts of New Jersey. We saw it happen in AP exams at the high school level, where in 2007, only 11% of the students were passing an AP exam in the entire school, to a place 6 years later where 81% of the students were passing at least one AP exam. We're now talking about opening the doors to college for the students at the high school. But this was just the work of one group of high schools. But then we started to see that when we codified this and named it and shared it, those results changed. First, a school right down the block said, I want to do what you're doing. And we see they went from the lowest achieving school in the city of New York, with only 7% of their students passing math exams, to 80% in both subjects. Then we went outside of the city of Newark, and a school in Chicago led by Jarvis Sanford took Dodge Academy, a failing school, and made 40 to 50 point gains in achievement in English, math, and science. He proceeded to replicate that same result with 14 other elementary schools. He became a turnaround expert. And then we saw it happen in Baltimore. We saw it happen in Tennessee. We saw it happen in Texas. And this is our first case in which this school was 100% ELL students. There was not a single student in the school who wasn't learning English as a second language. And this is a school where people said, you can do it with certain environments. You can't do it here. And these are her results. While the district and the state were getting weaker in reading, her school was shooting forward, and what should be harder for an ELL student to learn even than math. So much so that she became the principal of the year, and is now, as they always do, they get plucked up to become superintendents because of their results. And we saw it happen in Minnesota when a cohort of schools in Minneapolis-St. Paul joined together to change their results. And then we saw it happen with the UVA school turnaround program that took schools from Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, and Utah and got them all to make gains in achievement. And that helped us say, you know what? We're starting to learn what principal supervisors do to make the difference for groups of schools, not just principals. And that led to people like LaKimbra Brown, who took 4 of the lowest achieving schools in DC and got all 4 of them to make significant gains in achievement. Actually, all 8 of them, 2 graphs. If you are a principal supervisor, it's almost impossible normally to get 8 out of 8 of your schools to improve. Or Janine Zitta in St. Louis, who took the lowest achieving schools in St. Louis and again batted 10 for 10. Every school she worked with made significant gains in achievement after her work. Same thing with her colleague in Missouri. And then Teresa Corral in Texas started to guarantee that 72% of her schools were closing the gap faster than her peers. And in New York, and what we discovered was just like a principal, what distinguishes a principal supervisor is how they use their time. They focus on the levers of leadership and little else. These superintendents, no matter what else they had on their plate, no matter how many other requirements they had, did not get locked up into board meetings and preparations and administration. They were in schools working with leaders on the levers of leadership. So, what are these levers of leadership, and what does that look like? We don't have time to go through all of them in depth. We want to give you one brief case study of what does it look like. We're going to show you an example of observation and feedback from one of the leaders that we've got a chance to study closely. Ashley Anderson is the principal of high school Uncommon Collegiate in Brooklyn. And her students, 80% of her students are passing AP exams and are getting accepted into the top colleges in the country from Harvard and Columbia and Princeton all on down. And 90% of her students qualify for free reduced lunch. And we're going to watch her work with a high school geometry teacher. And we're going to show you a brief clip of what it looks like for her coaching. What are the ways they use their time that are different? So I have to give you a bit of context. First off, if you don't remember high school geometry and algebra 2, it's okay. Hopefully you can get the rest of the context from it. Hopefully remember. They're working on, I believe, amplitude in the midline, I think, at this point of their lesson. And they have been working on something to do during independent practice, which is called aggressive monitoring, which they've defined as how do you look and see what students are doing when they're working independently to help them get better. So she did a workshop. We love trainings. And what happens with trainings? Very few people implement them afterwards. This is the same issue. They did a training a couple months ago. The teacher didn't do anything. And so now she's having a meeting with this teacher to coach her. We're going to watch a series of clips. And here's the first one. So as you watch, how does Ashley launch her feedback meeting? And what are all the steps she takes in guiding her teacher? Let's take a look.
Over the past few weeks, before spring break, we've been focusing on direct instruction. Today, when I was in your class, it was great to see, before students jumped into practice, you asking one conceptual and one procedural question prior to the independent practice. What was the impact of that on their practice?
Well, specifically when it came down to the conceptual question, getting them to stamp that their own like self-check and understanding that 0 should equal 0 if you solve for the correct X was like great self-check method for them. Yeah.
I noticed that as well. There were less hands during that time. Students had, which led to students having a more sustained practice time. So great job.
Thank you.
It's really good to see. So now that we've set students up to successfully tackle the IP, I want us to start to think about what we do, how we use data during independent practice. Okay. So specifically today, I want to focus on aggressive monitoring.
Okay.
Think back to our last PD before break. What are the keys to aggressive monitoring?
I would say that the main focus would be to collect data, like in the moment data, just to get a feel of like, I think where your class is at. What else? I feel like that's like the main focus for AGMO.
Great to hear. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to push your thinking a little bit, and I'm going to show you a video of Mr. Frazier's class during his practice. Okay. And I want you to think about what is Mr. Frazier saying and doing to ensure that student papers look like his exemplar, and what impact does this have? Let's write that question down. Let's watch. What'd you notice?
Okay, so I have a couple of things. He announced before they started, I'm going to be checking for certain things.
Okay.
And then he said, the first thing I'm going to be looking for is amplitude and midline. He announced that there won't be any hands during that first round for students to refer to their notes. He was physically collecting data on his clipboard per round, I think. And then for his next round, he announced what he was looking for the next time. So first time it was amplitude and midline, and the second time he was looking for range.
What do we call that?
Laps?
Naming the
PD,
labs.
yeah.
And what was he doing with student papers?
He was physically coding them. So as he was going around per round, I don't know what the actual codes were, but he was either checking and circling, but each round he knew what he was looking for and was like, okay, yes, this is right, or no, go back.
What impact do you think this had on student learning?
Well, it's definitely something that I need to work on, which is the actual physical collection of data. Okay. It allows kids to kind of have a flow of a thought process out loud of what their work should look like, which is the exemplar.
Absolutely. So thinking about your own practice, you just mentioned a little bit of this. So when you think back to your independent practice today, what is the biggest gap between your practice and what you did today and what you just saw Mr. Frazier do?
I think my two biggest areas of concern or two biggest areas of growth would definitely be a code per round and then what I'm looking for per round.
Okay. And what should you do with that code while you're walking around?
Marking on kids' papers.
Marking on kids' papers.
Yeah.
And in order for you to think through that code, what should you have prior to?
An exemplar. So if I'm looking at the exemplar, then I should know exactly what my round should be.
Take a moment. Turn to your partner. How does she launch her meeting, and what are all the steps she takes in guiding her teacher? Turn and talk.
Call. That's very interesting. I'm sorry, I just got a call from my daughter's school. She's hit her head, so I have to take her to the doctor. Sorry, I'm going to miss it. And I was part of the team that's going to see you afterwards, usually. Yeah.
That is okay.
Sorry. I have to go. My daughter tripped up the stairs at school and hit her head. They recommend taking it to the program. Sorry I couldn't join. This is so interesting.
Let's unpack this. Let's share out. How does she launch her meeting? What are all the steps you see her take with her teacher to guide her? So the new voice. We'll start right here, and then I'll come back to you next. Right here? Yes.
She launches.
And your name is?
Sorry, Tara Bete. I'm with the World Bank. So she launches the session by giving positive feedback and letting the teacher know that she's watching the teacher closely and that that she thinks she's doing a good job.
So what are all the values to starting with positive feedback?
Well, she's paid attention to whatever the teacher has been doing, and that she tries to communicate how she engaged students in that part, and that she was doing that part of the job well. So,
Fantastic. What are some other, before we go on to the other parts of it, let's stay with this one. What is the power of starting with positive feedback here, in addition to what our colleague just shared? We will come right back here. I haven't heard from you yet. If you want to step up towards the microphone.
She also asked.
If you could share your name again for the group.
My name is Sarah. She also asks the teacher, after giving her the feedback, why that worked so well, which I think helps the teacher not just, since the rest of the conversation is on things the teacher needs to change, it also helps the teacher focus on things that she's already doing well and that are successful, so that instead of just focusing on the negative, the teacher also can work to continue to do the things that are already working.
Fantastic. We'll come right over here. Yes.
Maria. So I think it makes the teacher feel very comfortable, and then it sets a very non-threatening, tone for the conversation. So then, they have a safe spot where they can, have the conversation that will follow.
And I would add a few more things. When you tell someone they did really well at something that maybe they hadn't done well in the last week, you're reminding them that they can make change happen. And guess what? If that was your feedback from last week, the other message you're sending? Our feedback meeting worked. Our feedback meeting was valuable. When you're trying to recreate a culture in a school where teachers and leaders can feel like they're on the same team, wow, look, this feedback wasn't punitive. Your teaching got better. And there's something powerful about the fact that she asked, as you shared, Sarah, she asked the teacher to say what made the impact. How many of you here have children of your own? So maybe you'll have a shared experience with what I had. So I have 3 kids. And I remember when my oldest was 3 years old, and she'd come back from preschool with one of those paintings that you just can't possibly understand what they did. And I remember the first time I tried it, I was like, oh, Anna, that painting's so cool. I love the colors and what you're trying to do. And she'd just say, thanks, Dad. And she'd just go run off and play. But the next time she brought a nonsensical drawing home, I just said, hey, Anna, tell me about your drawing. Oh, my goodness. She talked to me for an hour about what she did in her drawing. Effective affirmation, we allow the person to talk about what they did, because it gives them a chance to really, really name what they put time into. We couldn't possibly understand everything they put in to make this work. That took 2 minutes to start that meeting, but she not only made the person feel good about their practice and reminded them about what they've done about it, but said that these meetings add value. So that was the beginning. So what else did she do? After affirming the positives, what are the other steps you saw her take? We'll come right here. That's it. It's just.
So what I really like.
Your name is?
Samra. My name is Samra.
Samra.
I like the fact that everything, she asked the teacher to reflect on her practice. So it was not, this is what I observed and this is what I think of it. Like, what did you think of it? What impact did that have on student learning? That she always brought it back to what do you think the impact was on learning? So I thought that was really effective.
Fantastic. What other things did you do in that meeting? Come right here. Yes. Now you've waited patiently for round 2. Thank you.
She gave her an example to watch, and it was really noticeable when she said, now I have a video, and the teacher there was this look of fear, like, oh no, a video, and then she said and she named what I assume is another teacher in the school.
Correct.
And there was this look of relief, like, oh, thank God it's not me. And then real curiosity, okay, let's see what he's doing that I'm not doing that I could learn from.
What is the power of showing a video in that moment? She shows a video of another teacher. What's the power and value of doing so? We'll go with Maria. Go ahead.
So the most important thing is that I think so it's not like, the the head teacher or someone else, telling them what to do. It's one of their peers, doing something very similar in a similar environment. So they know that this is something which is doable and someone is doing it. Secondly, I think it's non-confrontational in a way. So it's not like, I saw this in your, lesson, which I think is problematic, but just like, in an indirect way of maybe reflecting. So, you see the video and then maybe see, what are the 2 or 3 things that you can pick from this.
Let's think about what you just said there. It's not telling the teacher what to do. It's letting them see an example. This is a key idea we've come to understand about school leadership. That if you want a teacher to get it, get them to see it. If you want a teacher to get it, get them to see it. Because to see it is to believe it. When a leader simply says, you need to get better at getting your kids on task, a teacher's like, great, thank you. I don't know what that looks like. Let me show you a video of another of your colleagues doing it. Or let me just stand up and model for you what it could look like. I'm like, oh, that's cool. What we've just done is said the first step is not to tell a teacher what to do, but to let them see it. Because after she sees the model, what happens when Ashley asks, what's the gap between your practice and this video? The teacher has a list of things to offer of self-reflection. If Ashley had just started the meeting and say, how do you think your teaching went? The teacher would not have been able to list all those gaps. You get enlightened when you see a model to compare yourself. And this is what we call see it. The first step in effective school leadership of how you use your time. You start by what we can say seeing the success, noting what someone did well and letting them talk about why they did it well. Then see the model, see an example of what are the key steps and what are the things I could model, and finally, see the gap. What is the gap between this model and what I saw in your class today or yesterday? You've taken a conversation that for a traditional leader would be a lot of talking at a teacher, or would be a lot of just asking questions like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How is your teaching? How do you feel about how you taught? Which is often called cognitive coaching, but not actually making sure we get better to a higher bar. You've merged the two to something that is largely driven by teacher reflection, but the leader had the perfect questions in the middle to get them there. This is the first step in leadership across all levels, is getting teachers and leaders to see it, to see a model of what it looks like. The second step, we like to say, is to name it. Once you've seen an example, how can we name it? And here's another big problem we have in education. When most leaders, when anyone goes in to observe a teacher, and Ezekiel can attest to this with his observation tool, there are like 150 different things you can look for in an observation. And so how do you not get lost? Or should you just tell them all 40 things they could do better? So we studied the most effective school leaders. And by effective, I'm again defining a school leader who got larger student achievement results for their students. That more students were learning after their leadership than were before their leadership. And what we noticed is they didn't give evaluations of 40 pages long. They didn't write long emails of all the action steps you should take. They started from a basic premise. We already know what good teaching looks like. A lot of people have written about it. I have my 2 favorite authors. I choose my colleague, Doug Lamar, who wrote Teach Like a Champion, or the mentor that I met many years ago, John Safir, in The Skillful Teacher. But you can pick anyone you want. We've got tons of books on what makes effective teaching. Our problem is not defining effective teaching, is knowing where do we focus in that body of work. So what I did was that I studied the most effective school leaders, and I said, can you send me the feedback you gave to your teachers so I could study it? And I collected them from 15 of the highest achieving school leaders on the East Coast, and I put them side by side, and I noticed patterns. They were giving feedback in very similar ways, even though they didn't know each other. And I wrote it down, and I gave it back to the group, and I brought them together as a working group, and they said, oh, I like this. And we started to refine them. And we started to realize there's a common characteristic in the action steps of effective leaders that separate themselves from everybody else. Here I'm going to give you a sample. Here are 2 action steps, one around management and one around rigor, 2 sets of action steps that are characteristics of these effective leaders. I want you to read them for a moment and ask yourself, what characteristics do these action steps have in common? Take a moment to read. Turn and talk to your partner. What characteristics do these action steps have in common? Turn and talk.
Yeah. First one is like make sure.
Let's shout. What do common characteristics, what do the characteristics of these action steps have in common? What did you notice? We'll start back here. Go ahead. Yes. If you want to turn on that microphone.
So I find them very specific, actionable, but also there is a qualifying for the objective. For even a one sentence, there is an objective. Like stand at the corner of the room so that you can see all the students. So it drives the teacher's action.
Yes. What else would you like to add to that? Melissa.
That they're relatively easy in a sense. So even people who are not, necessarily great teachers or, me, I think I could do most of them just from reading through them.
Anything else you would add of what you noticed about these action steps? They're not very large. They're very small. And every one of them, you could walk into a class and observe whether or not the teacher was doing them. So, number one of standing at the corner of a room, it's a thing that if you've never been a teacher, you might not know the importance of it, but it's the one spot where you actually can see everybody, where nobody's hidden behind somebody else in their small groups or in their rows or whatever, so you actually can see and kids can't hide from you. Or the hot spots, right, exactly. Or the hot spots, like a good teacher knows, I'm going to pay attention to my 3 students who are the first ones who are going to go off task. Because once they go off task, I lose the room. A new teacher doesn't know that. They're just sort of scanning and just sort of hoping everything goes well. Or to just simply do this makes the student feel like you're looking at them even if you're not. Or think about the rigor ones. You said 2 + 2 = 5. I did? I'm sorry. I meant 2 + 2 = 4. Sometimes a student just gets a chance to correct for themselves. They can fix it. Agree or disagree? 2 + 2 = 5. I can ask the whole room, and then I can go back. So what's the answer? And then they can answer. What we noticed about these is they're so much more concrete, as you've said, and specific and smaller than what other leaders do. Other leaders write tomes of essays, of feedback that they give to a teacher. And when I first show these to school leaders, they say, yeah, but they're so small, they're not doing enough. You've got so much to fix. If you only worked on this, nothing would get right. But they miss the essential part of good feedback. The smaller and more precise the action step, the quicker the growth. The smaller and more precise the action step, the quicker the growth. This is totally counterintuitive, so let me try to demonstrate it from another field. How many of you have read the book by Daniel Coyle called The Talent Code? Let me know if you've read it or even heard of it. Okay. Daniel Coyle studied hotbeds for talent. So he went around the world and studied places that produced more talent than was statistically probable. For example, let's think about Brazil and soccer. They don't have the resources of Germany or countries in Europe. So how is it they are continually at the top of the soccer universe without the same resources? Yeah, we can argue about who's at the top of the universe. But there's a consistency there. I've just created a whole other problem on my hands. He also went to Russia. For those of you who are tennis fans, if you've ever looked at the female tennis rankings, well, the Americans are doing fairly well, but so are Russians, Russian female tennis players, and you won't find nearly as many Russian male tennis stars. What is it that's happening with Russian female tennis players? And he went to New York and found an academy producing more orchestra musicians than any other music academy. Why? And here's what he noticed. So he went to Russia to visit the top known instructor for female tennis players in Russia. And there was an old, dilapidated warehouse in the middle of nowhere. And he drove up. He's like, this is crazy. There's no way I'm going to find something here. Then it gets better. He walked into the warehouse where the tennis courts were located. And he noticed that the teacher had 40 young girls on a single tennis court. Now, if you've ever watched tennis before, you can't have more than 4 people on a court and actually practice. And he's like, this is nutty. But then it gets even better. He not only had 40 girls on the court, there was not a single tennis ball to be found. Every single girl was frozen in form with their tennis racket with a phantom swing. But they were frozen. And she would walk around the room and fix every grip until it was perfect. Say, okay, move your racket another inch, and she'd fix it all the way through the entire swing. And then they'd go back and they'd swing a little bit faster, but all she spent the entire day was just fixing their swing without a single tennis ball. Well, Daniel Cole's like, this is crazy. I don't believe it. He went back 2 months later, and they were hitting tennis balls better than he had seen anybody do just starting. Why? If you fix the grip from the beginning, then when they start hitting the ball, all they worry about is timing. They're not worrying about their swing. If we master one small action step to the point of mastery, we grow faster than when we try to do 5 things at once and get none of them right. And if you think you can master 5 new things at once, I'll poll all your spouses and significant others and ask them. We don't. And this is the power of what you just saw, that we see that there are criteria for action steps that leaders give to teachers in schools that are more effective. They pick the highest leverage action, the one that's going to make the biggest impact. They make it measurable, which is what you were talking about not only what to do, but how to do it and what's going to happen, and make it bite-sized. If you can't make the change in the week, the action step isn't small enough. So what happened is that we put those on paper and created a guide of action steps that these most effective leaders were giving to their teachers. And sure enough, when we handed it out to other schools, they got their teachers better, faster. Because they had a resource to make it easier to think about how to coach. It wasn't as hard to imagine what to say. We don't know how to give feedback sometimes, so we maybe weren't many of our leaders were not master teachers themselves. So we've named it. You see it, let them see a model, and then you name it. You give leaders concrete language that makes it easier to name what to do. And then we did the same thing for principals. We named the key, for principal supervisors, we named the key actions a principal needs to take to become better at being a school leader, so districts and superintendents could then coach their principals around those key actions. And this allowed people to change the way they think about leadership. If I could ask someone to read this quote for me, some have not heard it from. How about Shram? Can you read that for me?
When I started using the Get Better Faster guide for action steps, my whole approach to teacher development changed. Before, I felt like my feedback was a little like whack-a-mole. Tackle a random problem over here to only have another one pop up over there. I felt pretty directionless. Now I have a clear starting point. Has my teacher mastered phase 1, phase 2, and a clear trajectory? This allows me to spend less time on what my feedback should be, and more time on how to deliver that feedback and how to practice. In the process, I've seen my new teachers move so much faster than before.
See it, name it. And there's one final step in what great leaders do, which we could call do it. How do you make it stick? I'd like to return back to the meeting of Ashley. And so they've named the action step. You have to learn how to monitor your students during independent practice and how to actually give them feedback while they're working independently. What does she do now to ensure that her teachers will be able to implement the action step? Let's take a look.
Okay, great. So now that we have a plan, we're going to jump into some practice. And
Okay.
what I have around the room are your independent practice from today. And you are going to monitor using your lesson plan.
Okay.
All right, so talk me through, what are you looking for?
First of all, just to make sure we understand, when she said their independent practice, they collected the student work from the previous class period that she hadn't yet looked at, and they've now put it on all the desks in the classroom. We'll pick it up from there.
So I'm doing 4 laps, and I am doing my first lap, which is them completing the square.
And how do students know?
I'm going to be circling if it's incorrect, highlighting where they should be looking, a check if it's correct, and they can move on.
And how are you collecting data?
Tick marks per lap.
Tick marks where?
On my exemplar.
You ready?
Yes.
Let's go.
Okay. As I'm coming around, I'm now looking at your perfect square trinomial. How did you create your perfect square trinomial?
Pause. What are you going to do? Your code.
Do I tell them that too?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. As I'm coming around, I'm looking for your perfect square trinomial. If I circle it, that is where you should be focusing on. If I check it, move on to the next problem. As I'm coming around, I'm also focusing on if you have the correct signage in your boxes.
Good. Good. What are you saying so far?
Okay, so what I'm noticing is that people are just skipping this step. So they're adding 16 on both sides, but they're not simplifying, and then it messes them up when they have to actually solve for x to find the square root. So they're missing this second step this third step of the perfect square trinomial.
Yeah, that's exactly what I got. Okay, perfect. How did that feel?
Good. I liked it a lot because now, especially for the perfect square trinomial, I know exactly where on the exemplar I'm looking at and where on the paper I'm looking at. So that was good.
Good. Let's sit down.
Okay.
You just finished your practice. How did that align to what we named in our exemplar?
Well, first and foremost, each round was very clear and concise. So we wanted to make sure that we had a name and a lap for each code. And I think that was great for me. Also, I had the exemplar in hand, and that was great for me to refer back to. And I collected data on trends for every lap. So I think hopefully that aligns our exemplar.
It did.
Yay.
Great job. Usually I ask you what's the best time, and I'm coming in next period to see this. So that's super exciting. I'd also like to see the exact chart that we used today in your lesson plans from now on.
Got it.
So if you could just keep that in there and reuse that would be great. And then before we close out today, restate for me your action step for this week.
Okay. So my action step is to aggressively monitor one procedural, one conceptual lap by naming each lap in code, marking every paper with the exemplar in hand, and to collect data on trends per lap.
Nice job. Nice job today.
Turn and talk. What does she do to ensure her teacher will implement this action step effectively? Turn and talk. Let's share out. What does Ashley do to ensure that her teacher will be able to implement this action step? What does she do? Let's see, get some new hands. Who I've not heard from so far. Oh, yes. Thank you. Perfect. Come on up.
Hi, my name is Turna from the Education Global Practice. So one thing I think she does is, there is a clear practice in a somewhat safe environment of a very specific tasks with some nudging, but not like do this, but she allows the teachers to do it, but while providing a little bit of guidance. And then she allows the teacher to really use the information she collected, like how are you going to use it? Is this useful? Give her a chance to kind of go to the next step of whatever that exercise was.
Fantastic, fantastic. What else did you see? What would you highlight? Melissa?
I think just the level of detail of walking through each step, like you were saying with the, very positive, gentle nudges, but sort of saying, even from the beginning where she announced what she was going to do and the principal said, oh, wait, announce your code or whatever it was, and made her do it again. And then, making sure she was marking on her checkboard. I think without all of those little things, it seems like she wouldn't have gotten at the end to the insight that she needed, which is that they were skipping, one of the steps to be able to solve the problem.
You put this together, and what you notice is something that appears a little magical at the beginning until you break it down. But what you practice is what you value. And if you do not practice, there is no progress. If you had a basketball team in which the coach didn't show up to practices and just came to the games, that coach would be fired. If you had an orchestra that never practiced and then tried to perform a concert, no one would come listen to them. If you are an attending doctor, you will not let a doctor operate on you who hasn't had to practice before they do so. And yet, we have a worldwide culture in education of not practicing. Of thinking, I just have to go in and teach from my own knowledge and expertise, or lead from my own knowledge and expertise. But as I shared when I gave this workshop in the Dominican Republic, what do you practice the most in this country? Baseball, soccer. Clearly, that's what you value the most. What would it look like to say we value education enough that we're going to practice? What's amazing about these leaders that are in the upper right-hand corner is they've created cultures of practice. Where they've said, why can't we create an environment where we practice just like a musician, a doctor, an athlete, or someone in another field? And this is what we call do it. Just do it. We will not get better until we practice. This teacher made mistakes now when there's not a single student to suffer from that mistake. And it's a safer environment. I can try something out without anybody seeing me as I get better. Do it is simply get a teacher to practice and then lock it in. It's also, let me go see you do it now to make sure you're actually implementing it. That comment she says, normally I ask you when I'm going to observe you, but I'm going to see you next period. I'm not going to trust that you do it. I want to follow up, not just because I don't trust it, but because I'm going to make you better if I see it in action and can see, what mistake did you make when you had a student in front of you? Maybe you froze up. Maybe it became more difficult. And I can help you do it by being there when you do. So what you've seen is what we call the fastest way to grow and develop a skill: to see it, name it, do it. And this applies for teaching a teacher and for teaching a leader. And I'm sure it's very similar to what we do with students as well. Let them see a model, let them reflect on their gaps, name the concrete action to take, and then give them a chance to do it, to put it into action. And that practice that we've given you, we've codified in that reference that we have for everybody who's in the room, I believe. It's a spiral bound. Oh, it's over here, so you'll be able to pick it up at the end, if you didn't pick one up at the beginning. But just to name it, we watched over 1,000 hours of video of the most effective leaders coaching teachers and tried to codify what they do to be able to disseminate for others. And what you have in this guide is a guide to all of those resources at your disposal. So on tab 3, we have a guide for giving effective feedback that says, see it, name it, do it, and gives the exact words that a leader can use when implementing these steps. And what we discovered is when we put these guides in the hands of a leader who had never done it before, and then gave them a chance to practice giving feedback, leaders got better. Schools got better. Learning improved. That if we can name it on paper, let them see models and do it, we can create not only better teachers, but better school leaders. So I just wanted to take a moment as you think about this. So I'm about to transition and think about what are the implications then for what we do at the World Bank and how this could influence our practice. But first, before we do, just turn and talk to your partner. What are your key takeaways thus far of how the importance of school leadership and the key things you've learned right now, but what makes effective school leaders? Turn and talk.
Yeah, sure.
Here's one for you.
Thank you.
Here we go.
Probably, I would say, yeah. I mean, because we have half an hour more. That way we can start getting. I mean, so far has been very interactive. But I'm sure people will have questions. Yeah. But I mean, I don't know how yeah, exactly. It's not straight.
So that's just the beginning of the conversation. We're going to have some time for you to share and ask a bunch of questions as well. But I want to think about the implications for this. So if this is what we've studied happen in effective schools worldwide that become the exemplars in their cities, states, and countries for achievement, what does it look like to reimagine how we can create more schools like this? And especially when it's not just one leader working with one teacher, you're responsible for 100,000 schools, or for how do we take this and reimagine how we can build schools of excellence? Well, first, let me share with you some common mistakes that we've seen in trying to develop great school leaders across the globe. Too much content with little focus on the levers of leadership. And so we feel like if we bombard school leaders with long, lengthy sessions of lots of content, they'll become experts. We take sort of the undergraduate approach. I'm just going to lecture at you for a while and throw a lot of stuff at you, and you should become good. A sage on stage, the way we deliver that content is I'm just going to talk at you and give you a lecture and give you theory. Your job is to figure out how to apply it. Let me just make sure I give you all the theory. A lack of exemplars. I like what you're telling me, but I have no idea what this looks like. Tell me a real success story with kids like mine, how this actual works. And a lack of what we could call communities of practice. I don't have a leader I can learn with. I'm all alone. The school leader job is considered one of the most isolated jobs in our world. Most other leaders of an organization have a line of people protecting them and supporting them around them. A school leader is often on their own. And a lack of feedback on implementation. Principal training programs try to get people to write papers reflecting on their practice. But that's different than saying, how is it happening in my school? So these are some common errors in what we do when we're trying to develop principals to become better school leaders. What is a possible recipe to change that? We could use the same see it, name it, do it model, but talk about it at the larger level. What can we do to get leaders to see the model? How can we give them a concrete guide of how to do it, name it, and do it? Give them a chance to practice these levers of leadership to build effective habits. Take a moment and dive into each one of these. See it. See the model. Step one is to start from the exemplar. As we like to say, if not, you'll be rushing to the fire without water to extinguish it. You don't know what's broken until you've seen something that's fixed. How does this translate to principal training programs? We need to give leaders the opportunity to see exemplary schools in action and then to create them to serve as a model for others. As I was sharing with our team from Pakistan, they say, where would you start? We've got schools where there are no schools that we would call exemplars yet. Great. Your first task is just create like 5. I know you have 100,000 schools, but if you have 5 schools that are exemplary, they will be your hotbeds for producing future leaders. They will be the places people can go see. They will be the ones that start from the ground up, start to influence change. Don't implement just a 100,000 school strategy if you're not creating one exemplar school where people can go see it. They can watch it. But the same thing I said is, and for those 5 schools that you think are closest to becoming exemplary, let them go travel somewhere else to see an exemplary school in action. Let them see it for themselves. It's transformational when you see something greater than you've ever created yourself. It like raises your ceiling. We can't do that for 100,000 people. What we're going to do is we're going to create the exemplars within the country that they can see, but until we have one, let's invite a group to see exemplars in other countries that we can learn from and then create their own. Use proven leadership models to help them see the model. We're offering you one today, Leverage Leadership 2.0. We're offering you that today as these guides because it's been proven to work. There are others that work. This is just the one that I've had a chance to work on and can share with you. But don't try to create a new leadership model. There's no need, especially with the urgency of the work. But we also need to give them effective teaching models. Yesterday, I was a part of launching a principal academy in the Dominican Republic. I was teaching them how to give feedback. It came to the time where they had to be a model for the teacher, and we were working on how to give clear instructions in the classroom. And I asked the principals in the room, okay, what does it look like to give clear instructions? And there was a freeze in the moment because the principals that I was working with couldn't figure out how to give clear instructions themselves. They didn't know what good teaching looked like, so it's tough for them to coach someone. They have to see it. We have to show them effective models. And we have videos, and Teach Like a Champion of a video library from all across the world of great teachers they could watch. Let them see the models, and they know what the new ceiling can be. And in case you didn't know, these are the books that have over 150 videos of leaders in action in urban low-income schools and teachers in actions in urban low-income schools. They don't represent all the countries we serve yet, but until we create those, we can use them as a starting point. And Doug and I wrote these books on purpose so that See the Model could become a reality without travel. That if you can get yourself a book and watch a video, you allow yourself to be able to learn even without traveling. The step 2 then is to name it, which means focus our training, 70% of it, on these levers of leadership. This is where schools get learning results. The rest is good theory. It's helpful. It's nice to have in schools, but it doesn't make learning get faster first. And as soon as we don't put learning first, I fear we can lose the heart of what schools are. And so change our training to focus on concrete, practical levers that they can use tomorrow, minimize the theory, and minimize the training around operations. Are those important? Yes. Might the boiler break down, or might you not have the food show up for lunch? Sure. Yes, we have to do those, but those should be a small part of the program so we can make sure they know how to lead instructionally. And once again, these books also have the resources you have in your hand. They have 1 or 2 page guides to every lever to make it as simple as possible. You don't have to read the whole book. You've got that as a resource, but we've got practical guides you can carry around with you. The schools that I work with carry this around with them every day, the school leader, so they can just reference it while they lead, because it's got what they need to do the work. And the final step is to do it. The quality of a training program is determined not by the quality of what is taught, but by the quality of what is practiced. This I want to stop and pause on. I ask yourself, of all the training programs you've been a part of, how often did they ask you to practice? And I don't mean make a plan. Make a plan is helpful. They might ask you, okay, make a 90-day plan. That's good, right? But actually get up and practice. What is your speech going to look like to your teachers when you go back to announce what you're about to do? How are you going to give feedback to that teacher? When you look at the assessment that they just gave, how are you going to interact with them and understand their results? We can't just expect them to answer that if they don't practice it. And if they don't practice it, we don't create new habits. Well, it's really the basics to creating a culture of practice is to create communities of practice. Create leadership development that focuses on practice, and the 7 levers all have do it as a part of it. But then create teams of leaders who can practice together, observe each other, and receive feedback and improve. We will never find enough coaches to coach principals to become good. They just don't, they don't exist. Our good principal supervisors come because they've been a good principal. And so it's going to take us a while to get there. So if we don't have someone who can coach everybody to become good, then let's let principals work together to become good. One thing, as an example of community practice, is a group of principals in Dallas, Texas, said, okay, we're going to observe each other in our schools and give each other feedback. 5 principals. Once a month, they traveled to one of their schools, observed the school, and gave feedback on not only the school, but on how they were leading. They accelerated their growth, and a group of 5 became the highest gaining schools in Dallas because they worked together. They didn't have a district superintendent who helped them. That person didn't exist yet. But they had a community of practice. It's a lonely job, and that's how we can build practice to happen. You can get 500 principals in a room and get them all to practice with the right procedure. I could show you a video of that, but I won't, to allow us to have more time for questions. But a great training program is measured by how much people practice. If you would attend a session on leverage leadership, you would see that at least 25% of every session is direct practice, and another 25% is planning to practice. So half of the sessions are planning and practicing to make this happen. And you can create a culture of practice in any organization by just deciding you're going to. But the constant question I get is, well, and where I work, people would revolt if you ask them to practice. They're not used to it. Guess what? That's the case everywhere in education. So here are some 4 tips that we've learned from lessons learned. You roll it out. You show them how people practice in medicine, in sports, in music. You say, we're going to try to do the same. And here's some examples of leaders practicing in other schools and other places. Guess what? We're going to try it. And then you model it. The leaders we've seen be successful say, if I'm going to get you to practice, I'm going to practice too. I'm going to dive in with you, and we're both going to practice together. And then you just implement that consistently. I like to share for a school where practice has never happened before. The first time you ask a teacher to practice, they're going to give you a face like, what? The second time they ask you, they're going to roll their eyes. The third time, it's like, boy, you really mean this, don't you? And then they either come with you or they go elsewhere. They normally come with you. You've got to just stick with it and just be positive and emotionally constant. So if we did that, we think about, here's my final reflection questions for you. How often do school leaders have the opportunity to practice and form parts of communities of practice? And how often do they receive feedback about the levers of leadership? The answers to these questions is what could determine a difference in the quality of their leadership. So let me pause right here and give you a moment. As you now think about trying to take this to scale and changing the quality of our schools via our school leaderships, what takeaways are in mind? What are you thinking about the key things? First of all, what questions might you have? And what takeaways do you have of what we could do to reimagine school leadership? I'm going to first let you talk with your partner about it, and then we're going to share out our thoughts or our takeaways that we've had thus far and our questions. But first, turn and talk. What are your key reflections that you have about the takeaways for us about reimagining school leadership? Turn and talk.
Whatever you do it, art.
We have about 20 more minutes together. I just wanted to open the floor for questions or comments to make this as applicable and helpful and valuable for you as possible. So open it up for any questions or for reflections. Yes, and share your name again.
Yes, Naoko, and I have two questions.
Great.
One, like when we work in our respective institution, sometimes I hate my supervisors because my supervisor is micromanaging. So like I just felt like some of the steps which has been shown in the clip, etc., are very precise and very small steps. And some of the teachers might feel like, oh, am I being micromanaged? So I would like to know if there are some instances like that. That's the first question. And the second question is, like in our development work, we have so many pilot projects. Yes, very successful in a small scale, but when we want to scale up, it kind of dies. And a lot of time I hear is, yes, for example, I had a training, even including the practicing. I go back to my own schools. I don't have time to do things. My PDAs do not support me doing that. Or I simply don't have money or whatever. So there are so many reasons they can make excuses. So I'm just wondering, to scale up or to have that more sustainable, are there any minimal conditions you could still think about?
I'm going to try to remember both of those questions. Those are great questions. The first question, if you've done whatever you want and someone starts to coach you, it's going to feel like micromanagement. because you've never been coached. So if you've been playing the piano by yourself and have taught yourself to play the piano and nobody's ever told you a thing, and then you get a piano teacher, it's going to feel like micromanager because you're not used to coaching. I want to distinguish between that and you've had an effective coach and now you have a micromanaging coach and how challenging a micromanaging coach feels. So we've got to distinguish between the two. Effective coaching, where coaching didn't exist, might feel that way at first. The difference is how you feel when you're done with the coaching. An effective coach, you see yourself get better. You don't see yourself being blocked by micromanagement. And so the reason why a teacher like this is not going to feel micromanaged is because, like, wow, my practice just got better. But it is a culture shift. There's no doubt. We're starting to say everybody just doesn't do what they want. We're going to coach you to get better. That will be a shift in culture. But it's a shift that teams can make together. And when they see themselves get better and their students learn better, it feels exciting. Or it feels exhausting, but I know I got better. Sometimes it's going to feel like a bad workout or like you're exhausted afterwards, but you know your muscles are stronger after you're done. And so what we try to do is create the conditions where they see themselves get better to help get through the intensity of what it's like to actually have a coach. Second question. So I guess the best way to answer that question would be to talk about various places that started small and made bigger impact. So I'll start with the city of Dallas. The first time I went to Dallas, I gave a workshop to about 30 principals. And we did it around data-driven instruction. And those 30 principals had a host organization in the city to follow up and support them. And of those 30 principals, one of them made a difference in achievement. The other 29 did not. And they're like, wow, here are all the things we did wrong. And they asked that leader, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? Here's all the things we did right. Here's the thing wrong. They tried it again the following year. They had 20 of their 30 principals make gains. And what happened? The district leadership said, what are you doing that you have 20 schools that improved when only 30 schools improved in the entire district, 1,000 schools? What are you doing? And they started to pay attention. They did another training where they invited a lot of people to just learn, get a good vibe about it. Fast forward 4 years later, and the statistic I shared with you is 72% of the schools that implemented these things, which are about a third of the district, have made significant gains in achievement in a very large city. So I don't believe in pilots that remain pilots. I believe in creating exemplars that then drive change because they've made it work. There's a difference. And what happens is around the exemplar, you then train with the exemplar in mind so that other people can see that model and say, oh, wow, it does work. We're training with it, and now more will follow. The key is making sure we invest in the first leaders that become exemplary to learn not only how to lead their school, but how to train others to follow. That was the heart of what we discovered in our Leverage Leadership Institute with our 25 fellows. You could get really good at leading your school and not know how to teach someone else to do the same. It's a different skill. So you had to train them both to get excellent at leading their school and then excellent at training others. So we taught them how to lead workshops. We taught them how to interact with difficult people and how to make that happen. That's what allowed the ripple effect to go beyond a simple pilot and to start to impact a larger group. In Chile, another example, they decided we don't have any people who are in favor of doing this. The political landscape is against this. And they said, well, but we can't, people love to come to conferences, so we can get a conference organized and have 1,400 people come to a workshop to hear about this information. And all of a sudden people are like, oh, this doesn't sound so bad. So then when they launched their pilot, they kept the local districts from restricting it, from blocking it, and they could make it happen because they had changed the environment. I'm not saying that any work in this places where we work where need education is going to be easy. But what you do is you try to create the conditions by which they will allow the pilots to begin and then to thrive, and then they can start to share that practice around them as it grows. That's been my experience in different places. I think the answer is going to be unique in each environment we're in. I know in the city of Newark, it's one of the biggest success stories in the United States. It's closed the gap in achievement by about 30 points from where it was 5 years ago. In large measure in that case because of a number of new schools that opened up in the city, charter schools, to start doing more effectively. That's not the case everywhere. But in that case, they had to create conditions where it was okay to grow. So they had to make sure that there were conditions in place around them that would allow them to grow. I think every city and country is going to be unique, but it's not a pilot for a pilot's sake. It's a lever to enact greater change. Yes?
Just following on from that, what happens in a country where the data is not reliable, either at the school, district, or national level? Because those graphs you showed were very powerful. And if a country doesn't have that data, how do the pioneering schools demonstrate they've changed?
Yeah, I think that's a real serious question we have to answer. In the minute we stop measuring whether or not students learned, we just get into pedagogical debates about whether the school is good or not, and then I think we've lost. So I think in those cases, the lever of data-driven instruction, one of the first steps is define how you're going to assess the learning. And where a country doesn't do that, or a city doesn't do that, I think we equip our leaders to come up with a tool to measure whether or not their students are learning. And that is an investment. But there's the value of an exemplar. If one leader can create one and say, hey, share these tools, we can all use them. They may not be perfect, but they align to our national curriculum. They measure it as well as we can, and they allow us to say, are our students learning? But it does require us to say, we can't just take on practices and not pay attention to learning, or we won't know if our work is working or not. So we'll have to create rudimentary student assessments that we could use where there in cases where there are not. If not, education turns out to be a philosophical debate. And I think our children lose when that becomes the case. Yes, Maria.
My question is regarding the professional development
Maria,
professional development aspect of a school leader's, job. And in some of the countries, in the context that we work with, the school leaders are basically more consumed with management tasks, and professional development is something which lies with either, another institution or, with the teacher coaches, and they are not really involved in, professional development of teachers. So what, can the school leader do in such circumstances where at the end of the day they are concerned about how their school is performing or how the students are performing, but they are not really part of, the teacher development process? Thank you.
I would guess that that's the case in 80% or 90% of schools in the world. Instructional leadership is a new phenomenon. It is, or if not new, it is a not disseminated phenomenon. I think great school leaders have done it forever, but it's not something that's been named the issue, and administrative tasks burden everyone. If you actually look at the latest research in the United States, the average school teacher in the United States who's a veteran gets observed once every 2 years. So we're showing you places where that's no longer the case. There are thousands of schools where that is the case. So I think that is our battle to fight, is to say it's time for us to reimagine what a school leader should be. And that means we're going to rebuild how you use your time. And so that is what I'm saying is where we should start, is to reconsider school leaders just being administrators. And I think that's the case everywhere. Now, if you are, like I have a school leader who has a school of 3,000 students, with, however many teachers that comes out to, 200 teachers, you're not going to be coaching those 200 teachers yourself. You're going to have a team helping you. But you still have to have your eyes on the development of your teachers as your number one role, even if you're not the direct manager of all 270 teachers. And that's what I think this work is. And so what it comes down to is, if you look at part of the work of the training is to build a new schedule where you use your time differently. And that means removing obstacles. I like to use the words creative compliance. There are a lot of things you have to comply with. We have to find a way to do that the most efficiently possible and not get somebody breathing down our necks, but reduce the amount of time we spend on it. I don't want to win the prize for the best report. I want to write the shortest report that doesn't get me in trouble and then go back to doing instructional leadership. Every school is going to be different how we tackle that, but I do think it's saying, I'll say one more thing. When we look at the most effective school leaders, if you can get to 40% of your time devoted to instructional and cultural leadership, your school can change. We're not asking for 70% of your time. 60% of your time can still be consumed with administrative tasks, angry phone calls, the crisis that happens in the middle of the hallway where two students get into a massive fight, hopefully not two teachers. Like that can consume 60% of your time. For me, 40% is doable. We can redefine jobs so 40% of your time is spent on instructional and cultural leadership. And that I've seen over and over again. There are ways for us to do that, but we have to help our leaders re-envision how they use their time. Yes.
What role do accountability mechanisms play in motivating school leaders to want to do a better job?
It's a great question. Accountability. It depends on the leader, right? In general, I think that there's going to be a resistance from many leaders to wanting to make a change. What you have to do is you have to create the environment to which they desire it. Part of it is seeing a model. When people see something greater than what they've done, you can engage and hook people in who weren't otherwise hooked in. But then the other part is building incentives to want to grow. If you look at New Year's resolutions, the people who stick with them normally have someone helping them stick with it. We're not very good on ourselves. So, for example, I was sharing this with our Pakistan team. What do you do? We're in a place where a lot of leaders are like, I don't care. I don't want to do this differently. Learn from the incentives. For example, we're going to invite you to a prestigious program where you're going to get developed, but you're going to have to film yourself leading and get feedback. But in exchange, you get a chance to get this, this, and this. Would you like to be a part of it? There are a lot of people who say yes to the attractive parts, even if that means they then have to get feedback, they have to practice, they have to grow, but you can get them in the door. And then once people actually get feedback and actually practice, it actually hooks them. Most of the time, they're like, holy cow, for the first time, I'm getting better as a school leader. That's not through trial and error. But you got to get them in the door. And so on the accountability, I think the schools, we have to hold the schools accountability for students learning. And for me, that's the measure for us to say, are we succeeding or not? And so outside of that, I don't know that a consequence for not making it actually changes much. We've done that a lot in this country, and it hasn't exactly proven to work. But saying, because your students aren't learning, you have to be a part of a program, but we're going to invite you to get extra support if you do X, Y, and Z, has been where schools have turned around the most. And I think if we can create enough schools to turn around, then those who don't want to do it start to realize this is not for me. So yeah, I don't have an easy answer for accountability. I think it's a core part of what we have to do, and it's not always easy. Yes.
Thank you. Mine is not actually a question. I wanted to follow up on her question where she was asking about the fact that in many of the systems where we work, the school leaders are not actually the ones who are supposed to be giving feedback to the teachers. But in some of the situations where I've worked, once the school leader understands that that is supposed to be their responsibility, they push for the change to the extent that the relationship between the inspectors who are supposed to be giving feedback to teachers and the school now becomes a different relationship, because in this case, the school leader understands their role and begin to observe and provide feedback to the teachers. And therefore, they push for the change for the inspectors or the district level staff. And that begins to be kind of like a movement of change in the system.
So I want to honor our time here. I just want to say a few closing comments, and then I'll stay for extra questions from you who would like them. But just I'm very struck that what we're talking about here is creating habits. That if we want to change schools, we have to create new habits of how school leaders spend their time. I think Aristotle says it best. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. If we want to create new schools that have better learning outcomes, we need to build new habits in our school leaders. What we've seen is when we do, it works. If they have the right habits, they've seen what it looks like to be successful, they can name what it looks like, and then they practice, they do it, they can start to create schools of excellence. And when we do that, we have the opportunity to make Simon Rattle happen in every classroom that we get a chance to work with and every school. Because in the end, it's about outcomes for every one of our children that we get a chance to work with. So thank you for letting me be with you for the past few hours, and I will be here with any other questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We could probably stay here 2 more hours and still be very engaged, but I'm not sure we can do that. I wish I could. First, I should say this has been the easiest seminar to chair because I didn't really have to do anything. I could sit down and learn and even practice. So thank you. Thank you very much. I found it excellent and inspiring, and from the look of people, that was why I was sitting on the corner. I could see everybody very engaged. So now, you've seen it. It has been named for you. Please go and practice it in our projects. Thank you very much.
Let's organize. That's what you did also in the